Exactly. Okay, so today's daf is tzadi.
Right?
So we're going to start right below where the wide lines start on Peitet Amud Bet, the second of the wide lines, where it says Tanu Rabbanan, Tavrish. Now this is a little bit of a challenging daf, particularly the first Amud of tzadi, but we'll do our best. So Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis start. If somebody includes others on his Korban Pesach, as we know he's permitted to do, or on his Chagigah, as he's also permitted to do, whatever money they pay him to allow them to join onto his Korban Pesach is Cholin Biyadom. That means he can go to the mall and buy whatever he wants with it. It has no Kedusha whatsoever. And somebody who sells his burnt offering or his Shilamim, so it says, Lo asav lo klum, that he has done nothing. In other words, you can't tell it doesn't belong to you. It's a korban. So if you say, hey, I have a bridge, it's like saying I have a bridge to sell you. I have a bridge to sell you. Give me the money. What do the people get? Nothing. Right, so it's the same thing. He says, I have a korban to sell you. It's not yours. You can't sell it. So what happens to the money though? So what we do is we make the money go to korbanot nidava. So even though the sale is void, because you can't sell a korban, it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to God. But we take the money anyway and we give it to the Beit HaMikdash. So the Gemara, of course, asks, if we're going to say that the money, that the sale is void because the korban really doesn't belong to the person, he has no right to sell it, so why does the money become kadosh? Why does the money acquire kedusha? The answer is, Amar Rava says, Kinasa, it is a penalty. In other words, what's the penalty? Rashi says that we say, it's like the saying goes, Rashi says, Lav achberaganav el churaganav. It's not the thief that steals, it's the hole that steals. In other words, the hole that lets the, it's not the mouse that steals, it's the hole that steals. Right? So what it means is by enabling the person. So even though you might say, well, here the seller was really the bad guy because the seller tried to offer something he doesn't really have a right to sell. But the fact is, if there was no buyer, the seller would be out of business, right? So the same thing. So we kinas actually the buyer. We don't let the buyer get his money back, even though he gets nothing in return. You shouldn't be trying to buy korbanot, you know. Okay, so now the Gemara says, "My kol shehen." What does it mean? Kol shehen yiplul nidava. Whatever the money is, it goes to nidava. It goes to korbanot. It means even if he tried to pay for a korban that was worth 4 zuz and he paid 5 zuz. Whatever money he pays towards the korban that he doesn't actually acquire goes to the korban. Goes to the Beit HaMikdash. Why? Because he shouldn't be trying to buy korbanot. And if there weren't people trying to buy korbanot, it's just like those guys who sell the hot off the truck stuff in New York City. You know, they lay out those blankets and they sell all that contraband stuff. If there was nobody who bought from those guys, they wouldn't be stealing the stuff or pirating it and selling it. So that's exactly what the Gemara is saying here. Amar Ula says V'yitem Rabbi Oshaya. And some say Rabbi Oshaya said this. Efshar yadei chavrin bavla'ei tamei d'hai milta. Is there anybody among our friends the Babylonians who know the reason behind this halacha? One guy separates a sheep for his Pesach, and one guy separates money for his Pesach. What does that mean? So the problem is as follows, and this is the problem that is going to occupy the next Amud, and it's a very difficult Amud. So let's give a brief introduction. What is the issue going to be? The issue is like this. I set aside a Korban Pesach, and then I call up Rabbi Reuben and I say, would you like to join on my Korban Pesach? We'll have a very nice seder, we'll have Divrei Torah, it'll be good. He says, sure, let me pay you for my share of the Korban Pesach. And so he gives me money towards his share of the Korban Pesach. Now I already set aside my Korban Pesach, it already has Kedusha. I take the money from Rabbi Reuben for his share because he's going to participate in the Korban Pesach. And what happens to that money? It says Cholin and Biado. They stay Cholin. So I can go now to the mall, buy myself a nice hat for the holiday, buy myself a suit, whatever I want, because the money is mine. It doesn't become Kadosh at all. So the question that Ula was asking was, how do we explain this phenomenon? Because normally In other words, one guy had money that he set aside to buy a Korban Pesach. That money would ostensibly have Kiddusha because you set it aside to purchase Korban Pesach.
That's your money.
No, his money that he's going to pay me to join.
So his money.
Oh no, we're already getting confused, and we didn't even get to the hard part yet.
Okay.
Let me review the case again because I don't want to. Don't say anything because I don't. It's really confusing.
Yeah.
And if you say anything additional, you're going to completely derail it. Okay.
I just want to understand
Okay. I have a Korban Pesach already.
Right.
It is already holy.
Yeah.
Somebody else, I'm just using Rabbi Reuben as an example, comes with money that he set aside to purchase a Korban Pesach.
Right.
And instead of purchasing a Korban Pesach himself, he decides to join me.
Right.
He gives me the money. So the problem is, his money was designated to purchase a Korban Pesach. It already had Kiddusha.
Right.
The money had Kiddusha.
Right.
My Korban Pesach already has Kiddusha. So how can it be when he gives me the money is not doesn't have Kiddusha anymore? Because normally what happens, when you purchase, let's say, something with money, and the Kiddusha can go into the animal. In other words, if he were to have purchased from a dealer just an animal for his Korban Pesach, so what would happen? The Kiddusha of the money that he set aside for a Korban Pesach, so to speak, goes into the animal that he bought, and the money is just regular money. It doesn't have any Kiddusha anymore. The seller of the animal just has regular money.
Right.
But in this case, I already designated my Korban Pesach. So I can't say that the Kiddusha from his money is going to go into the Korban Pesach because there's nowhere for it to go. This Korban Pesach is already holy.
It's not available.
Okay, it's not available to receive the Kiddusha. So where did the Kiddusha and his money go? Okay, so there are two, right, poof, it went bye-bye. So,
Took and bought a hat.
right, so how could that be? The Mishnah said. Right, no, but that's holy because it's a black hat. Yeah, no. So how does it work? How does it work? So there's two possibilities. Okay, there are two possibilities. Possibility number one is that when I designate my Korban Pesach, I leave some room in the Kiddusha of the Korban Pesach, so to speak, for somebody to join. So it's almost as if we imagine that it's a puzzle with pieces, and I designated certain part, but it leaves some space open for somebody else. So when somebody new comes, when Rabbi Reuben comes and he purchases a portion in it, that portion becomes kadosh now, and his money becomes chulin. His money becomes mundane, it loses its Kiddusha. That's one way to look at it. Another possibility is that, no, really the Korban is 100% holy. It doesn't become less holy, more holy, that doesn't happen. However, could you go get another chair? So another possibility is that the Korban is 100% holy. He's going to be leaving soon anyway, so you go sit on the bench. So that the Korban is 100% holy, but the money wasn't 100% holy. Why? Because when a person puts money aside to bring the Korban Pesach, I got nervous, to buy a portion of the Korban Pesach, what happens? He stipulates, I don't want the money to be kadosh. Okay? And so when he gave me the money, it wasn't that there was holy money that's now mundane money. It was never holy money to begin with. He's just paying me for the favor of letting him join my Korban Pesach. So there's two possibilities. Either the money never had Kiddusha, or the Korban Pesach didn't totally have Kiddusha, because otherwise we can't explain where did the holiness and the money go.
I'm already confused, sorry.
What? How could you be confused?
I'm already confused.
Okay,
because
again,
about the Kedusha
hold on, no. Okay, hold on, don't say anything, Korban Pesach, money.
Yeah.
If they're both holy,
Yeah.
there's nowhere for the Kiddusha and the money to go. Correct?
Okay, gotcha.
All right. Now, there's only two possibilities. Either the money wasn't really holy, and then therefore, when he gave me the money, the Kiddusha didn't have to go anywhere because there was no Kiddusha in the money. He was just paying me to just being nice. There was no Kiddusha in the money. He set it aside, but maybe he never actually made it hekdesh. He just set it aside.
Right.
Okay.
And the Kedusha of the
Either
money
that
is from the fact that he designated it. So I designate money, I designate money, it becomes holy.
Right.
Then it goes to you, right, for the portion.
Right. But you're assuming one of the answers already in that description of the case. That's what I'm trying to say.
What am I assuming?
You're assuming that the money's holy, and I'm saying to you that there's something has to give. Either the Korban Pesach is not fully holy. It's still half holy, half unholy.
Right.
And when he gives me the holy money, it the Kiddusha of the money goes into the rest of the Korban Pesach.
And the money is not holy.
And now the money's not holy anymore. Or what's the other side? The other side is that he never really made any Kiddusha in the money.
Okay.
He just came to me and said, hey, I want to make a deal with you. Let me give you some chulin money, and you'll be nice to me and let me eat your Korban Pesach.
Or maybe he doesn't even say
Okay.
Maybe you just let me.
No, just come over, right? Just include me because you have to be signed up, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you have to be signed up. So let me sign up. So that's the. So that is. These are the two possibilities. Either the money wasn't really kadosh, or the animal was lacking kedusha, and the money was kadosh, and the kedusha from the money went into the animal. So one way or another, the money has to lose its not have kedusha when it gets into my hand, either because it never had kedusha, or because it did have it, but it went into the animal because there was space in the animal to receive additional kedusha.
He left room for it.
He left room for it because he didn't fully designate it. He designated half of the animal and said the other half is going to be for somebody else who's going to join me.
Why can one of the options be that it had Kedusha and then it lost it completely?
Where did it go? It has to go somewhere. Because that's not how halakhically it works. It never works like that.
So that's the thing. Okay, that's
It's like energy. It has to go somewhere.
So there's a certain Kedusha that was...
It can't just disappear.
an
Something has to
object.
happen.
The difficulty is where did
the Kedusha go? Right.
Got
And
it.
this is not even the confusing part yet. Okay, now let's go to... Now, okay. So, so now we come to...
Simple people.
Yeah, you're already confusing me now. All right, now let's go. Now we move to Tzadi Avod Aleph. Here's the confusing part. Now you're going to find this easy. Okay. So now we have as follows, okay? The following problem, and it requires another introduction. There is a discussion in another Masechet called Masechet Tmura, and part of what makes this Amud difficult is it's kind of written backwards. It's like it explains itself later. So, but I have to tell you it now, or you want to understand what it's saying. So, there's a Gemara in Masechet Tmura that says that we know that the Torah tells us etnan zonah, the payment for a harlot cannot be a korban. So if you pay the harlot with an animal, she can't use it as a korban. Correct? Okay. What happens? So the Gemara talks there about let's say you gave a korban that was already designated. In other words, it's a korban shalamim that you had already, and you gave that to the prostitute. Will it now become etnan zonah?
Wait, and that money was chulin? Or
No money. What are you talking money? I'm giving an animal.
An animal.
I gave her the animal. The animal itself, korban. I gave it to the woman as her payment. Can that also become? Is it now prohibited to be used as a korban? So the Gemara in Tmura says no. It says no. Why? Because it's already holy. You didn't have a right to give it to her in the first place, so to speak. It wasn't yours. It was already holy. So in other words, when I take an animal that she was given as payment and now I want to designate it as a korban, that's no good. When it's already a korban and I gave it to her as a payment, that can't change it from being a korban. It's still a korban. Okay? Now there's a pasuk brought there to show that it won't invalidate the korban in that case. All right? Now, that's step number one. Step number two is that Rabbi Oshaya explains that case as follows. That case, why did the Gemara have to tell us over there? Is the question. Why did the Gemara in Timurah have to tell us that if I take a korban and give it to this prostitute, that it's not going to become invalid? It should be obvious. It doesn't belong to you. So by giving it to her, you didn't do anything. So therefore, Rabbi Oshaya comes along and says it's talking about including a prostitute in your korban pesach. What do you say to her? You scratch my back, I scratch yours. You know, your reward is going to be a portion of my korban pesach.
It's not much different than the first case where you invite.
Right? Yeah, I paid you. I'm paying. Right? She pays others. Right? There's services, and you're giving her the opportunity to come to your seder. It's a payment.
Right.
So what does he say? That what might you think? Okay, that's going to invalidate the pesach because what did I just do? I just gave a portion of my korban pesach as etnan zonah, payment for the zonah. And so we need a pasuk to tell us that doesn't invalidate the korban pesach. Okay? That's the Gemara in Tmura.
That's easier to understand.
Your ride is here, Netana.
Her services are not kadosh.
Right.
Right. No,
I mean,
of course.
Your money might have been kadosh, but her services.
No, we're not up to the real problem yet. We're not up to the real problem yet, okay? We're not up to the real problem yet. So that's step two. So step one is we have this extra pasuk to tell us that a korban, once it's a korban already, can't be invalidated by becoming the price of a harlot. Then you have the Rabbi Oshaya comes along and says that what's that talking about specifically? That's talking about including her on your korban pesach. And why does it work? Because he says according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, it works like this. Since the korban pesach is only 75% holy, because I left room in it for someone else to join, so when I allow her to join, it's actually chulin. I'm giving her a part of it that was still chulin. Because I only kept for myself 75% that I already designated, and I left 25%, so to speak, of the animal undesignated. It's not kadosh.
The 25% is holy.
Right, the 25% is, we can't really divide it up, but in our mind, we imagine it. That's what I'm giving her. Okay? So I'm giving her that piece that was chulin. So, it's very simple. You might say, it makes sense. Because I'm going to say, well, I'm giving her chulin as a payment for that service that she gave me, right? I'm paying her the chulin, and then it's becoming holy. So how could that be? So that means that the price of the prostitute is becoming part of my korban.
Right.
See, when the korban was already completely holy and I gave it to her, so she can't ruin it anymore. It's already a korban. But when I'm giving it to her as payment and then it becomes kadosh, now it's a problem. So that's why the pasuk has to come and tell me that even in that case, it's still okay. All right. Now, so now let's take a look at what's the Gemara going to do with this? The Gemara is still trying to figure out our case. Our case is in the Korban Pesach. When you pay me to join the Korban Pesach, is it that your money wasn't really holy and that's why I'm allowed to keep the money? But the Korban Pesach was totally holy? Or is it that your money was holy, but my Korban Pesach was only 75% holy? So the holiness of your money went into my Korban Pesach. So this interpretation that we just said of Rabbi Oshaya fits with the second understanding, because it's saying that why would you think that including the prostitute in your Korban Pesach is going to be a problem? Because your Korban Pesach was only 75% holy.
Right.
You gave her 25% that was holy, and then it became holy. That's why you would think it's a problem. So to here we'll say, you gave me the money that was holy to acquire that last 25% of my Korban Pesach that wasn't holy yet. Now that 25% becomes holy and the money is deholified. Okay? Now, right, you transferred it away. So now we can understand what Abaye is about to say. Amar Abaye says, he loved Okmei Rabbi Oshaya lahahi b'mimanezon al pischo v'Rabihi. If not for the fact that Rabbi Oshaya interpreted the Gemara in Tmura that we just mentioned, okay, as referring to one who includes a prostitute on his Korban Pesach v'Rabihi, and it's the opinion of Rabbi, right? That's what we said. That this case is the opinion of Rabbi, namely that the Korban Pesach is only partially sanctified until everyone is signed up. Therefore, the issue of including a prostitute on your Korban Pesach as part of her wages would be problematic. Okay? And that's what Rabbi Oshaya said. He said, if not for that, then I would have said a different interpretation. We could have said that what is the Gemara in Tmura coming to tell you? When is using a korban to pay a prostitute a problem? That really it's Rabbi Yossi Aglili's opinion. That I would have said like this. When do we need a special pasuk? Not because Korban Pesach is only partially holy. I disagree, says Abaye. Rabbi Oshaya said that. Rabbi Oshaya said the Korban Pesach is only partially holy. He said that's what Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says. I say that's not true. The Korban Pesach is 100% holy. But what kind of Korban would raise a question? Kodashim Kalim. Kodashim Kalim are like Korban Shlamim, Korbanot where you eat most of it. It's a lower level of sanctity. And according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, even though you designated the Korban Shlamim as a Korban, it still belongs to you. Because 90% of it you're going to eat. Only a little bit goes on the Mizbeach. It's yours. So if you gave that to a prostitute as her wages, it stands to reason that could be a problem. Because it really does belong to you. maybe her possession of it now is going to invalidate it. And that's why you need a pasuk to tell you that it's still okay. But the idea that the Korban Pesach is only partially sanctified, and therefore we're talking about a case where you included a prostitute on the last 25% of the Korban, that's ridiculous. I mean, either it's kadosh or not kadosh. We don't say it's 75% kadosh and you give 25% to the woman. That's what Abaye says. Bamaot vaday mishayer inish de meikara ki mafrish lahu adata dachi mefarish lahu mafrish lahu vaha rabihi. He says, what is it here in the Korban Pesach that we're dealing with here? The money was never holy. The money was never holy. That's why when I come and I pay you to let me join your Korban Pesach, you can use that money for whatever you want, because there was no kedusha on the money to begin with. I just meant the money to pay you for the nice favor that you're doing of letting me join you. Not that I'm acquiring a share of the Korban Pesach, and therefore the kedusha of my money is going to go into the Korban Pesach. No, there was no kedusha on the money.
And you're not fulfilling the mitzvah of Korban Pesach.
Yeah, I am, but not because I'm putting more kedusha into it. I just sign up with yours.
You made a reservation.
I made a reservation, but it was already holy, the Korban.
Unpaid reservation.
Right. It's an unpaid reservation. I'm just paying you for your trouble of letting me come.
Okay.
Right? But it's not going to the Korban. And that's why the money that I pay you to join your Korban Pesach stays chulin. You see that you can tell from here, by the way, I'm not a Talmudic textual scholar or anything like that, but you can tell from this page that it's had a lot of manuscript and it's a little bit bumpy, because there's a lot of repetition on this, like in this section here, he keeps repeating himself, and there's a lot of parentheses that we skip. So you could tell that probably there were variant girsaot here. Right, variant texts here. You could just tell, you could just feel it. And in money, people definitely would leave over and say, I don't want it to be holy yet. Okay? And now again he repeats himself. He says, Lo mokmina le ana kerebi deba Pesach lo mishayer inish. He basically said the same thing twice. Okay, he says, I don't agree with Rabbi Oshaya that we're talking that the prostitute case is a case where you gave her part of your Korban Pesach, because I don't believe that you only sanctify 75% of your Korban Pesach. I believe something's either sanctified or not. And if it's Kodashim Kalim, maybe we could say it's a Korban Shalamim like Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and therefore it still belongs to you, and therefore you can give it as a payment to somebody. But the idea that it's a Korban Pesach and it's only 75% Kadosh, I mean, where's that coming from? That doesn't happen. We don't reserve part of it as Chulin. Okay, we're skipping all the parentheses, but you could just tell that it's bumpy. It's like, why is he repeating himself? Obviously, there's different girsot here. Now, our statement, though, in other words, our statement here that says that when the guy gives me money to join my Korban Pesach, that the money that he gives me is chulin, that cannot be Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Why not? Because it says at the end of that statement that somebody who sells his Korban Olah or Korban Shalamim didn't do anything. And according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, you could sell your Korban Shalamim, because your Korban Shalamim is Kodashim Kalim, it belongs to you. So in other words, we have two statements. We have our statement here about the Korban Pesach, right, which said that if somebody gives you money to join the Korban Pesach, the money is not holy. And also said if you sell a Korban Shlamim, that it's not a valid sale. So what does that mean? It can't be Rabbi Yossi Aglili, because Rabbi Yossi Aglili would say that if you sold the Korban Shlamim, it would be a valid sale. So therefore it must be Rabbi. And it's not, but the reason why Rabbi says that the money that you pay to join the Korban Pesach is not holy is not because there was a part of the Korban that wasn't holy, it's because the money was never holy. That's all. The money was never holy. Yeah, that's what Abaye is saying here. Period. All right. So v'hashta de okmei Rabbi Oshaya lahayi zonal piskov Rabbihi. But from the fact that Rabbi Oshaya forced the case to be a case where you included a zonah, you included the prostitute on a part of your Korban Pesach. So what do you see from that? You see that Rabbi Oshaya does believe that a person leaves a part of their Korban Pesach unsanctified. Right? That's the machloket here. The machloket is it that the money is unsanctified, or is it that part of the Korban Pesach is unsanctified? And so Rabbi Oshaya is definitely holding that part of the Korban Pesach is unsanctified. That's why the only case he could imagine where we would have an issue that that a Korban being given to a zonah would become invalidated would be the Korban Pesach, because he says it wasn't fully holy, and then you're giving it to her and it's becoming holy. So it's like consecrating her wages for a Korban. Okay? But Abaye is rejecting that. Abaye doesn't like that. Abaye likes the idea that, no, the money was never holy. Not that the Korban Pesach was partially holy. Now we say, Mayid Rabbi Oshaya, where is the source of this Rabbi Oshaya that you keep quoting here? So that's why it's Choser al Atzmo, it goes back to, it could have said this in the beginning, it would have been a little easier. Titnan, because it says in the Mishnah, Natan la mukdashin, if you gave the prostitute mukdashin, korbanot be'etnana, as her payment, what a classy guy to do that. I mean, Haray elu mutarin. These are mutar. In other words, you can still offer this korbanot because you don't have the right to give her your korban as a payment. Ofot de cholin. However, if you gave her chickens, a very respectable payment indeed. So then, hare elo asurin. Now you can no longer use those birds as korbanot. You give her obviously not chickens, but a bird that could be a korban. Okay. Now you can't use them. Why? Now the basic reason is because one of them was already sanctified before. Korbanot's already sanctified. She can't ruin it by you giving it to her because you didn't do anything, halachically. You didn't even give her anything. It never was hers. It never was yours and it wasn't hers. However, the birds, you gave it as her wages, and now she wants to bring it as a korban. No good. Now, shahaya badin, because you might have argued the following, kal v'chomer. Umma im muktashim shamum posel bahan. If when it comes to korbanot, where a mum invalidates them, okay? In other words, a korban, even after it's designated, if it develops a blemish, it will become invalid. En etnanu machir halalehen, giving it as wages to a prostitute does not invalidate it. Okay, so we see that we're more liberal about the issue of etnan zonah than we are with a mum. Because a blemish, even if it happens after the korban's already designated, would still invalidate it. Right. But giving it as a gift to the prostitute will not invalidate it. When it comes to birds, okay, where there are no real halachot of mum by bird korbanot. Okay, there's no. I mean, if it's chaser ever, it could be invalid if it's missing a limb. But otherwise, the nuances of blemishes we don't apply to birds. Shouldn't we also think that even if it was a regular bird, not a korban, and you gave it to her as a gift or as a payment, it should also be not a problem. Because we see that in the case of korbanot of animals, where even after it's designated, even after it's sanctified, a mum can still ruin it, a blemish can ruin it. But giving it as payment to a prostitute cannot ruin it. So a bird that doesn't have the rule of blemishes certainly shouldn't have the rule that if you give it as a payment to a prostitute, it will become ruined. It won't be able to be used as a korban. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says lechol neder. That's why the pasuk says lechol neder. You can't use an etnan donah, the payment of a prostitute, to fulfill any oath. In other words, you can't use it to fulfill a korban. Lerabot et ofot, to include ofot, to include birds. Kal v'homer lemukdashin. So all the more so then, we should apply it to animals that are already sanctified as korbanot. I mean, if we're going to say that a bird which doesn't have the rule of mum is going to have the rule of it's invalidated because it was given as payment to a prostitute, so korbanot that could become ruined if they got a mum, shouldn't we say that by giving it to the prostitute it's going to become ruined? So me'atam ma'ofot she'en hamum posel behen etnanu machir halalehen muktashin she'hamum posel behen eno din she'etnanu machir halalehen. In other words, that's the kal v'chomer we just said. So therefore, Talmud Lomar lechol neder prat len nadur. It says lechol neder. You can't make it. You cannot designate something that was given as payment to a prostitute. You cannot designate as a korban. However, la nadur, something that was already designated as a korban, cannot be ruined thereby. Okay. Elatamad de katav rachmana neder. Halav hachiyav amina mukdashin chalis or etnan alehen. So the implication here is.
Wait, are we deriving that from this statement, or we just know that?
We just know that.
Okay.
So if the Torah hadn't told us a special pasuk, we would have thought that giving a korban to a prostitute invalidates the korban. So then the Gemara asks, but how can a person prohibit something that's not his? In other words, he already sanctified the korban. Once you sanctify the korban, does it belong to you anymore? It belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It belongs to God. How now you give it to the prostitute? Did you really give her something? It's as good as selling the Brooklyn Bridge. It wasn't yours. So how did you prohibit it? Why would the Torah have to tell you that doesn't prohibit the korban? It should be obvious. Amar Rabbi Oshaya, and this was the original context of this Gemara in Tamura. Now, if it had just told us it in the beginning, I wouldn't have had to give you a long introduction, right? This is the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Oshaya b'mimane zona al pischo v'Rabihi. See, that's exactly what we had to explain as an introduction before. That what is the case where the Torah has to tell you that korbanot don't become ruined, don't become invalidated by being given to a prostitute? It should be obvious. The korban doesn't belong to you. Answer, it's talking about including the prostitute on your korban pesach. Because since when you sanctify the korban pesach, you leave, so to speak, room in it that's still chulin. You don't 100% sanctify it. You sanctify 80% of it. So therefore, it actually is partially chulin. And since it's partially chulin, you might have thought that that it would become invalidated if you included the prostitute as her wages on the korban pesach. Therefore, the pasuk comes to tell you, even in that case, where part of the korban is really not sanctified yet, still it won't ruin the korban because the korban is partially sanctified. That's the chidush.
And it's it's already accepted fact that you can do that to actually designate a portion of your.
That's what Rabbi Oshaya is saying, according to him.
Okay, so that's in other words, it's not everybody, but
not everybody agrees with that. That's what he's saying.
Because the entire thing would go down if you wouldn't be able to.
That's what he's assuming, right? That's what he's assuming. Now, this whole piece here is obviously what should have. If this had been before the discussion of Abaye, we would have actually understood what he was saying.
Right.
I wouldn't have had to explain it to you. Okay, that's why I'm saying it was like convoluted. The structure of the page is slightly convoluted because after it has a discussion about Rabbi Oshaya, then it tells you what the Rabbi Oshaya is, and you didn't know what it was. Yeah. Okay, now, well, of course Rashi helps, but still. So my Rabbi, what is the sort? Where is Rabbi getting into this? Why is he attributing this to Rabbi? The Tanya, as it says in the Braita, Im yim atabait mihiot miseh. That it says if the house is too small, the household is too small to have a goat or sheep, a goat. Okay, make him live from the seh. In other words, from mihyot miseh means hachayeu miseh. So Rashi explains here. What does it mean on the side? Im yim atabayit. So it means im yu ma'ot mu'atin lebala pesach miyot miseh. If the person who wants to go buy his korban pesach doesn't have enough money to afford a goat on his own, she'ein lo bameh leknot litzorchei pesach, he's not going to have enough to buy the rest of his yom tov needs. V'lakach u'shcheno akarov el beto yikach ma'ot mishcheno. Okay, he should take money from his neighbor, and then v'yimanenu al pischo. In other words, what it's saying is, ha'chayom miseh means that you can benefit from the goat. So in other words, you go and buy the goat. Really, it taxed your budget, right? Now you have no money left for Yom Tov. No problem. Go to your friend, say, hey, neighbor, want to be on my Korban Pesach? Give me a couple $100. We'll be together. He gives you a couple $100. Now, that money doesn't become holy, right? Necessarily. You can go buy whatever you want with that money.
So that was the first.
Right, that's the whole question. That's the whole question, right? Either that money, this is the same case, right? So either that money was never holy because you made the korban holy already, or your korban wasn't fully holy. Same question. So it says michdei achila velo michdei mekach. So the Tanakh Kama of the Braita says you can only use that money for things that pertain to the preparation of the Korban Pesach itself. For example, if you need wood for the Korban Pesach or anything like that. In other words, it retains some level of Kedusha. It's not pure Cholin. So if I say, come and join me with my Korban Pesach because I need the money, I can only mean I need the money for the barbecue of the Korban Pesach, not for something else.
So you can get the coal, you can get the tablecloth.
Whatever you need. Maybe not even the tablecloth, but the black hat for sure. Well, black hats, that trumps everything. I'm not so sure. Okay. That might be a different issue.
Put it on the korban.
Yeah.
Use the black hat to fan the fire.
Then it's okay. So Rabbi Omer, af michdei mekach. So according to Rabbi, even you could buy whatever you want. She'im en lo mimane acher im al pischo bal hagigato amot shebiyado cholin. Shalmad ken ikdish yisrael pischehen. That according to Rabbi, he says, no. In fact, you can take that money and buy whatever you need, and you can join other people onto your korbanot and take the money because al menat ken ikdish yisrael pischehen. That was on this condition that the Jewish people sanctified their korbanot pesach. In other words, their pesachim they sanctified from the beginning to allow for other people to join and for that money not to become holy. And now the way Rabbi Oshaya is understanding this is, what that means is that when they sanctified the korban, they left space in the kedusha of the korban for the other person to come along and bring money designated for the Pesach, and for the Kedusha from that money to go into your Korban Pesach, and for you to be able to take the money, and the money is not holy anymore. That's the way Rabbi Oshaya is understanding it. Rabba Rabbi Zera. Rabba and Rabbi Zera argue about this. Chad amar ba'itzim litzliyatu kol alma lo pligei dekeven tekad de pesach u kigufa de pesach deme. Ki pligei b'mato maror. Rabbanan tavrei ha achila achritihi. Ve'Rabbi savar kevan dechshero de pesach u kigufa de pesach deme. That one interpretation of the machlokah between Rabbi and the Chachamim is like this: that everybody agrees that if you need to buy wood, let's say, to roast a Korban Pesach, you can definitely do that with the money that you receive. The question is, what about matzah and maror? According to the rabbis, matzah and maror, that's separate. That's not the Korban. According to Rabbi, since you eat it together with the Pesach, it says, al matzot umrorim yochluhu, you have to eat it with matzah maror, so it's like part of Achilat Pesach. But according to this interpretation, Rabbi is not being that radical. He's not saying the money is totally mundane either, because he's saying you still have to buy something towards the eating of the Korban Pesach.
But that adds nothing to our logic, because
not yet. No, it doesn't. It's a separate issue. The second version says no. Everybody agrees actually that you can take the money to buy even matzah and maror. Everybody agrees that. Okay. Since they are part of the Korban Pesach, Pesach Damen, they're like the Pesach Taf Kipligi, Likach Bo Haluk, Likach Bo Talit. The question is, can you buy a shirt? Can you buy a talit with it? That the rabbis interpret mihyot miseh from having a seh to mean that you take the money and it has to contribute in some way to the Korban Pesach itself. Why are you bringing your neighbor over? Not so he can give you money to go buy clothes, but to give you money so you can make sure that your eating of the Korban Pesach is complete. Rabbi says you can make yourself live from the goat. In other words, sell an extra portion of the goat so you can take the money and go buy a new suit or whatever. Okay? So this second version is the version we've been operating with up till now, obviously. That Rabbi holds that the money is completely chulin when you receive it. So Abaye amar ilavdim okma Rabbi Oshaya lahaidim manezon al pischo veRabbihi halim okmin alav kodeshim kalim bali b'Rabbi Yosei Glili damar kodeshim kalim amon balim hu aval b'Pesach l'masher inish. So according to Abaye though, Abaye rejected Rabbi Oshaya. Rabbi Oshaya was saying that how does Rabbi's svara work? How does the idea work? It works like this. When you sanctify the Korban Pesach, you leave space in the Korban Pesach that's not fully holy. And therefore, when the friend comes over and gives you money that's holy, that Kedusha can now transfer into my Korban Pesach, because it's not full, so to speak. It's not full of its quota of Kedusha. Okay? However, Abaye said, I reject that. I say that the Korban Pesach, when you designate it, it's 100% Kadosh and no more Kedusha can go into that. It's just that the money was never Kadosh. But according to Abaye, how does he interpret Rabbi? Rabbi says, Al menat ken higdishu Yisrael Peschahen. That it was on this condition that the Jewish people sanctified their Pesach. In other words, implying that when you sanctify the Korban Pesach, you sanctify it in a special way that allows for additional people to join. And for their money to be for its sanctity to transfer. So how is Abaye going to explain that? Abaye will tell you that what it means is that when the Jews set aside money for Korban Pesach, they do it in a certain way. Not that when you designate the Korban itself, it's done in a certain way. That's not true. When you designate the Korban, it's done 100%. But when you designate the money for Korban Pesach, a person designates it understanding that they don't want it to be Kadosh. They don't want it to have Kedusha because they might join with somebody else and just want to pay the other person for their trouble. Okay?
The difficulty that I have is that, to me that should be obvious, because what if you designate, a portion of it and then you don't get the customers, So
right.
Does that mean that whatever Korban the Korban Pesach you're going to do is only going to be partially?
No, that means that there's I think that the way it probably works is that when you designate it, it's not that you can't really have something. It's like being a little pregnant.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So
it's a korban, but what he's saying is, I think what Rabbi Oshaya's theory is there's a certain flexibility to the Kedusha that it allows for, it's subject to additions of Kedusha.
But that would have to be up to the point that you're offering the korban, after which or that it's always
it's not a
that,
sum,
but it's not really a partial.
Right. He's saying it's a unique korban because it allows for additional people to invest in it along the way, instead of it being an either or.
Right, but the difficulty is in here. They're using that as, okay, because of that, because we're able to do that, then that means a portion of it is not holy. Right? And that can't be.
But wait,
that can't be because
what about the bones? The bones you can't break.
It has to be on. It has to be on meat because you can only include people on the meat.
That's the portion of the animal that is reserved that doesn't have the kedusha.
But then how would you be able to put your kedusha on that because you can't eat it?
Well, you're putting the kedusha.
It has to be on meat. It has to be on the basar because it has to be on a kazayit of basar. So I don't think
but then it can never be holy.
But that seems to me to be.
It says that there's part of it. Right.
Because then
That's
that
a
could never be
flexible
holy.
capacitor.
Okay, so let's move on though, because this is a deep theoretical thing we're not going to be able to solve.
Right.
So the Mishnah says, Zav shar shtei re'iyot. Now we get into another issue of the Korban Pesach, which is, we've learned before that a person who's tameh, when the Korban Pesach is being brought, if he's a certain type of tumah, like tumat met, or similar tumot, he's pushed off to Korban Pesach Sheni, right? An individual who's tameh for Pesach Rishon, he's pushed off to Pesach Sheni. Okay, so zav shirash de re'iyot. There are two types of tumah that are going to be discussed here: a zav and a zava. Both of them have different halachot. So a zav, if he sees one emission from his genital area, he's what's called a balkeri. If he sees two, he's a zav. Okay, and he has to wait 7 days, 7 clean days. If he sees 3, now he has to bring a korban on the 8th day. So there's 3 levels. A zava has a rule like this: if she sees only 1 day, she has to wait the following day, and she's okay. She goes to the mikveh on the following day. It's called shomeret yom keneged yom. If she sees 2 days of dam, she just has to wait 1 clean day, and she's good. If she sees 3 days, now she has to wait 7 clean days. Okay. So with that in mind. And bring a korban on the 8th day also, okay?
Or make her husband dinner.
Right, exactly.
Wait,
Now,
I thought Zava was not dam. I thought Zava was.
No, Zava is dam. Zav is not seminal emission.
Oh, I see.
Right, but Zava is.
1 day of Zam.
Right.
That's not serious.
So Zav says, Zav shirash de re'iyot shohatin alav b'shvi'i. If the 7th day of the Zav's clean days falls out on Erev Pesach, we can do shechita for him. We can slaughter Korban Pesach for him, even though at the moment that the Korban Pesach is being offered, maybe he's not able to do it, but tonight he'll be ready. Right? Now, similarly, Rash Shalosh, if he saw 3, so then shochatin alav b'shmini shelo. So then he has the 8th day too, right? Because he has to wait 7 clean days and then bring a Korban on the 8th day. So if his 8th day is Erev Pesach, we can slaughter the Korban Pesach for him on the 8th day because he'll be ready tonight. But if it were the 7th day, he wouldn't be ready that night because he hasn't brought his Korban of Zav yet. Similarly, Shomeret Yom Keneged Yom Shochatin Aleh B'Sheni Shela Rata Shnei Yamim Shochatin Aleh B'Shlishi V'Azava Shochatin Aleh B'Shemini. It's all the same concept. In other words, whenever that person is qualified to eat korbanot, even if during the day when the Korban Pesach is being slaughtered, he or she is not capable of, at that moment, eating a Korban. If by the time the Korban Pesach is being eaten, they will be ready, then you could slaughter for them during the day. Even though at the moment of slaughtering they're not ready, because you know tonight they'll be ready. That's the basic logic. Now,
Except that one requires an action, the other one doesn't.
well, the Gemara is going to get into that. Exactly. Okay? So now, Gemara says, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda says that Rav said, Shohadim zorkin al tivul yom u'chosar kippurei. That you can slaughter and throw the blood for a tivul yom. That means somebody went to the mikveh today and just has to wait for nightfall to be tahor. Or mechusar kippurim. What's mechusar kippurim? That is exactly what you mentioned. A person who waited the 7 days but still has not brought their korban.
It's possible they won't go to the mikvah.
Or let's say they went to the mikveh, but they have to bring the korban on the 8th day.
Right.
That's called mechusar kippurim. They have to bring the korban on the 8th day. Maybe they didn't do it. Okay. Ve'en, as we turn to Amud Bet, ve'en shohatin mezorekin al tamei sheretz. But you cannot slaughter the korban and throw the blood for a tamei sheretz, for somebody who became tamei by a sheretz, even though that's also only a 1-day tumah. As Rashi says, v'afal pi shebiyado lidbol layom, even though he could go to the mikveh today, and by tonight he'll be good. You can't. Ve'ula amar av shochatim mezorekin al tamei sheretz. And Ula says, I disagree, it's the same case. If I know tonight you're going to be good to eat the korban, so because you're only a 1-day tumah sheretz, it's 1-day tumah. You touched a dead creature that makes you tamei. So what's the difference between that and a zav, who this is their 7th clean day? zav that doesn't have to bring a korban. That this is the seventh clean day, and tonight he's going to be good. So the question really is on Rav. La Rav, Maishnat Vul Yom the Chazil Urta. To make sure it's not Chazil Urta. I mean, when it comes to a zav, why does he allows it to Vul Yom, right? He allows the zav who went to the mikveh today and tonight he's going to be tahor. He allows him to have the korban pesach done for him, and tonight he'll eat it. So what's the difference between that and the guy who became tamei with the sheretz? So the answer is no, mechusar tevilah. Because he's missing tevilah. This guy became tamei from a sheretz. He didn't go to the mikveh yet. Maybe he's not going to go.
Right.
The answer is tivul yom nami mechusar ha'erev shemesh. But the guy who went to the mikveh already, he still has to wait for nightfall.
Right.
So he's also lacking something. Shimsha memela arava. So the difference is because the sun's going to go down no matter what. That's not in your control. In other words, you will inevitably become tahor. A person who already went to the mikveh will inevitably become tahor.
You have to go.
But the guy who didn't go to the mikveh yet, he's not inevitably going to become tahor. Mechusar kippurim nami. But what about the mechusar kippurim? The guy who didn't bring his korbanot on the 8th day. You said that even though he didn't bring his korbanot yet, you could still slaughter the korban pesach for him. How could it be? Ha mechusar kapara. So same thing. So it says ha mechusar kapara shekino biyado. We're talking about a mechusar kapara who has his korbanot ready. Since he has his korbanot ready, we know he's about to do it. So tonight he's going to be ready. No, to sheretz nami are mikveh lefanav. So what's the difference between that and somebody who's tamei? The mikveh is right there. He'll go. The same. They both need an action. They both can do the action. Dilma pasha. Maybe. I'm sorry. So maybe he won't go to the mikveh. So in other words, once you say that there's an action involved, then maybe he won't do it. So maybe he won't go to the mikveh. Maybe he won't bring his korbanot. What's the difference? Answer: Kegon de masrinu lebetin uchid Rav Shemaya. The answer is that mechusar kippurim, we're only talking about a case where he put his money. What they would do was, the way they did mechusar kippurim was, you didn't have to stand on line. They had shofarot. They had these containers. It was like a pushka, right? You put the money in. Oh, you're a zav. You put money into there. The kohanim knew. Oh, this is money for zav korbanot. Oh, this is money for yoledet, for a woman who gave birth. And then they would just have in mind for whoever it was. They didn't know who you were. Right. They would bring the korban for you. But they knew what korban to bring. So once you put the money in there, it's a chazakah. We have an assumption. The bet din shel kohanim, the kohanim will not leave until everyone is done that day.
And
so since we know that everyone's going to be done that day,
it stays that way.
Right. Since we know that everyone's going to be done that way, we know you've done everything you need to do on your end to become tahor.
It's no longer dependent on any.
It's no longer dependent on your action. It's not your responsibility. Right. And we have a chazakah that it's going to be done. Okay. So what does that mean? That means we're not concerned. It's not on you anymore. So now ulirav mideoraita mechzach hazeh. What does this imply, though? That really for Rav, it's not that the person who says to sheretz can't have the korban pesach brought for him. It's a dirabanan. It's a rabbinic thing, but we're concerned maybe he's not going to go to the mikveh. It's a gzerah. But if that's true, then alama amar Rav, why did Rav say mitamin echad men b'sheretz? Rav, when we talked earlier in the Masechet, he said a problem where you have exactly 50-50. 50% of the Jewish people are tameh, 50% are tahor, and so we can't bring korban pesach rishon betum'ah. You can only bring korban pesach rishon betum'ah when the majority of the Jewish people are tameh. So what do? Be mitameh one person with the sheretz. Now wait a second. If Rav holds that really a person who is tameh sheretz can have the korban pesach brought on his behalf, it's only a gzerah midrabanan. Maybe he's not going to go to the mikveh, right? So why would he tell you to make the guy tamei with a sheretz? That's not going to help. That guy's tumah doesn't help you at all, because the fact is that guy actually can have a korban pesach brought for him. So he's not going to count towards the quota of people that need to be tamei to allow the Jewish people to bring korban pesach rishon in a state of tumah, because he could actually become tahor. So what we say, Ela Rav Midil Raita Nami Lo Hazeh. Rather, we must conclude that Rav holds that someone who's Tamei Sheretz, even from the Torah, is disqualified from bringing Korban Pesach. D'chtiv, as it says in the Torah, ish ki yeh tamei lanefesh. Because it says, a person who's Tamei lanefesh. Milo askinan shechal shabi shelo liot be'erev haPesach, dehainu tumat sheretz. What is the Torah talking about when it says a person who's Tamei lanefesh, who is Tamei from the dead body? It's talking about on the 7th day of their Tumah. And that's the same as tumat sheretz. V'amar Rahmana nidchayeh. And the Torah says that even though it's the 7th day, we still push it off. Just like we push it off with regard to, so therefore, similarly with tumat sheretz. Okay? That if the 7th day of the person falls out on Erev Pesach, we push them off. So too we push off the Tamei Sheretz.
In other words, don't take a risk because of that.
It's not a Durabanan, he's saying.
It's right, something where you would not be qualified.
Right, now it happens to be according to the way that Rashi and Tosafot learns this, that we're talking always here about cases where they didn't go to the mikveh. Okay? The Rambam holds that it's a Gzerat HaKatuv, that if the 7th day of Tumat Met falls out on Erev Pesach, you can't bring Korban Pesach. It's a Gzerat HaKatuv. According to others, it's just talking about as long as the status quo is maintained, you can't bring the Korban Pesach. But if it were possible to become Tahor, and you actually had gone to the mikveh already, you wouldn't be pushed off. It's only if you hadn't gone yet, when the time came for Korban Pesach to be slaughtered, and it was done already on your behalf, and you weren't ready, then you're pushed off to the next one.
But I guess from that Gzerat HaKatuv, we can derive. In other words, it might be Gzerat HaKatuv.
It's a machloket between the Rambam and Tosafot. If the person went to the mikveh and they were totally tahor in the morning of that 7th day, according to the Ravad, let's say, or the Tosafot, they would say, okay, so now you can eat tonight. Rambam would say, nope, once the 7th day is Erev Pesach, you can't do it. Yeah. Nidchi. So, v'chite mami ma'ida chisavar la ki Rabbi Yitzchak. So, and if you're going to ask Mimai Dachi, how do you know this? That a Tamei Sheretz, or somebody whose 7th day of Tumah falls on the Erev Pesach is pushed off. How does he know this? He holds like Rabbi Yitzchak. Amar Tmei mit mitzvah hayu shechal shvi shalem liyot ba'erev Pesach. Shenemar v'lo yachilu latzot Pesach bayom hahu. Because Rabbi Yitzchak says that why when the guys came to Moshe Rabbeinu and said we don't want to miss Korban Pesach, right? The innovation of Pesach Sheni. They said it says these people couldn't do Pesach. Bayom hahu, on that day. Meaning if it had been one day later, they would have been able to do it. Right? So what do we say? Aval lemachar yecholin lasot, v'amar Rahman ninchu. In other words, bayom hahu de'enan yecholin lasot, aval lemachar yecholin lasot, v'amar Rahman ninchu. So what does it mean? It means it's the 7th day of Tum'ah fell on Erev Pesach, they were pushed off. Okay? According to Tosafot, that could mean, or according to the Rava, that would mean that they didn't have time to become fully tahor before Korban Pesach was being offered. Or according to the Rambam, it's just a Gzerat HaKatuv. It doesn't matter. The point is, if they that we see from here that even though the 7th day fell on Erev Pesach and tonight they would be tahor, it doesn't matter. We push them off. So too, Tamei Sheretz, according to Rav, if the person hadn't gone to Tevilah yet, they hadn't gone to the mikveh yet when the Korban Pesach was being offered, pushed off. That's it. It doesn't matter that he goes afterwards and he's ready tonight. It doesn't matter. Since the Korban Pesach was offered while he was at Tamei Sheretz and he hadn't gone to the mikveh yet, if he'd gone to the mikveh already, everybody agrees. For Tamei Sheretz, everybody agrees. If he'd gone to the mikveh already and then they brought the Korban for him, he's Tivul Yom. That for sure. He would be able to eat tonight. But the question is when it was brought for him, when he was in a state of Tum'ah, but he had the power to become Tahor. So Rav is saying there, it's no good. Even though he could be tahor by tonight, it doesn't matter. It was brought for him while he was in the state of tumah, it's no good. Okay, now, Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah that that if a Zav saw 2 sightings of emission, we do the shachita for him on the 7th day of his purity. So, my love de la tavil. Isn't it talking about a case where he didn't go to the mikveh yet? We know, but he's going to go later. And by tonight he'll be tahor. But he didn't go to the mikveh yet, and we're allowing you to bring the korban on his behalf. Ushmamina, and we can learn from this. Shochanim is working al Tamei Sheretz. And you can infer from this that what? So too, against Rav, you should be able to infer that even though the guy who became tamei with the sheretz didn't go to the mikveh yet, we should be able to bring the korban on his behalf, as long as tonight he's ready to eat it. Right? So yeah, because isn't that what it's talking about in the case of the lo de tavil? No, it's talking about where he went to the mikveh. He had to have gone to the mikveh first. I tavil ma'ika mashmalan. But if he went to the mikveh, what's the chidush? Why are you telling me this at all? We already know tivul yom. We already know if somebody went to the mikveh that day and they're going to be tahor tonight, that it's okay. So why do you have to mention the case of the zav? It comes to tell you that even though there's still a part of his tahora process that hasn't been done, namely that he has to wait for sunset, since that's automatic, since he did everything he needs to do to be tahor, that's fine.
Oh, so he did the tevilah before.
He did the tevilah before they brought the korban pesach, so he's okay. Okay? Hachinami mistavra, and in fact this makes sense. Because of the case later in the Mishnah, where he had 3 re'iyot, and therefore he has to bring a korban. Not only does he have to wait 7 clean days, but he has to bring a korban on the 8th day, and therefore the only time we can bring the korban pesach for him is if it's the 8th day. Right? So then, amrat bishlama, if you're going to tell me zav sharash re'iyot shochani alav b'shavid tavil, that when it talked about the zav who saw only 2 emissions, we're talking about a case where he went to the mikveh, itztarich. So then we can understand the flow of the Mishnah, because salka datachamina rash re'iyot b'shavi'i hu delo mechusar ma'aseh. Because why does it? Because you might have thought. In other words, now we understand why you need 2 cases in the Mishnah. The first case is where he's not mechusar ma'aseh. He went to the mikveh already, and therefore they were able to bring the korban for him. But you might have thought that if it's a case of the 8th day, where he has to bring korbanot, you might have thought what? You wouldn't be able to do it. Why? Because mechusar ma'aseh, he's missing an action. He hasn't done everything he needs to do. So the Hidush is that even though he hasn't actually done the korbanot yet, since he put his money in or whatever, okay, we consider it done. Okay, he's not, even though it's mechusar ma'aseh, even though the actual step hasn't been done yet, we still let you bring the korban. So that's why you need 2 cases. You have the case number 1 is where it's 7 clean days, and on the 7th day he went to the mikveh already, so he did all of that he had to do. Case number 2 is even where he didn't do all he had to do, because it's an 8th day case where he has to bring korbanot. Still, we say you can bring the korban pesach for him. That's why you have 2 cases. But if you're going to tell me that the case number 1 is where he didn't go to the mikveh, meaning he hasn't discharged all of his obligations. Because if you're going to interpret it that he didn't go to the mikveh, then it doesn't make any sense. Because if in a case where he has 7 clean days and he's on the 7th day and he hasn't gone to the mikveh, he's 100% tameh. He hasn't even gone to the mikveh yet. And yet you're telling me that you can bring the korban pesach when he hasn't gone to the mikveh yet. So ra'ah shalosh b'shmini tavil le b'shvi'i. The kalisha tum'ah lo kol sheken de shahatinan v'zarkinan ilaveh. Then when we're coming to a case of an 8th day, where on the 7th day he already went to the mikveh, and now it's the 8th day and all he has left to do is the korbanot, shouldn't it be obvious? I mean, if in a case where he went to the mikveh, if in a case where he didn't even go to the mikveh yet, you're telling me that he can that we can bring the korban for him, and tonight he'll be ready. So certainly in a case where he went to the mikveh on the 7th day, and now it's the 8th day, and all he has to do is bring korbanot, certainly it's going to be true that you can bring the korban pesach for him, because he's not even tameh anymore. He just has this extra obligation of korbanot before he's able to eat. Okay, so therefore, Ella Shema Mina, it makes much more sense. That when it makes much more sense to assume that case number 1 is where he did go to the mikveh, and case number 2 is adding that not only when he went to the mikveh already and he's tahor, but even if there's something else that needs to be done, namely the korbanot, still you can bring the korban pesach on his behalf. But if he hadn't even gone to the mikveh yet, and he's completely tameh, then forget it. Then he wouldn't be able to bring it. So the Gemara says, Lo, le'olam e malach de lo tavil. Really, it could be saying that even when he didn't go to the mikveh, you can bring the korban for him. And still we could explain the Mishnah as making sense. Why? Because you could say that it's on the 7th day, okay, that we say that we can slaughter the korban for him, even though he hasn't gone to the mikveh yet, because after all, he has the power to go. But when it's an 8th day case, where it's not about going to the mikveh, which is under his control, but it's about the kohanim offering the korban for him, you might say, well, it's not in his hands. Maybe they're not going to do it. So kamashmalan Rav Shemaya. That's why we need to tell you that even when it comes to the 8th day, when it's not in his hands, because the korban is going to be brought by kohanim, that the kohanim are reliable. They're not going to let him down. We can rely on them to do it. So in other words, the maskana of the Gemara is that we can't prove from our Mishnah whether the Zav has to have gone to the mikveh yet when we bring the korban on his behalf or not. We can't prove it because we could explain the Mishnah either way. We know if he went to the mikveh already, that definitely we could bring the korban for him on his behalf. If he didn't go yet, we can't prove it. Because Rav will say, no, it's no good.
But what they're saying is that either way, it's still
saying
okay.
We can't prove, no, it's not saying either way it's okay. Because according to Rav, if he didn't go to the mikveh,
then
he cannot do it.
And there's no proof.
According to Ula, you could.
Right.
Okay, according to Ula, you could. Even though you haven't gone to the mikveh yet, you could have them bring the korban on your behalf, because by tonight you'll be good. Okay, so but we can't prove from our Mishnah. So we'll go a little further to try to finish off this piece here. So, that we said that a zava you can slaughter for her on the 7th day. Okay, in other words, the 7th day of her clean days. Amar Lei said to him, Zava b'shvi'i shela michazia. So in other words, instead of our Mishnah that says on the 8th day, it says on the 7th day. Said, how could you say the 7th day? The 7th day, she's not capable of eating a korban, because she hasn't brought her 8th day korbanot yet. This might be her 7th clean day, so tonight she'll be tehorah, but she hasn't brought her korbanot yet on the 8th day, so she can't eat from another korban yet. So how can you include her? So he says back, okay, I'm sorry, I skipped a part. So what he says is that when it comes to it, even at Tamei Sheretz, okay, or even according to the position that you're allowed to bring the korban for the Tamei Sheretz, who hasn't gone to the mikveh, that's only because he can go to the mikveh and tonight he can eat the korban. But this woman, even though she went to the mikveh today, she can't eat tonight till she brings her korban out tomorrow. So how can you include her? Ema bashmini. What I meant was the 8th day, not the 7th day. It has to be. Pshita, but then it's obvious. What's the chidush? That you might have thought, same thing that we said before. You might have thought that since she has to bring these korbanot on the 8th day and it's not in her hands to do it, maybe it won't be done. Answer is we rely on the kohanim. Ravina Amar Nida Tanakame. He was, in other words, they each had to correct something about the statement. The first guy changed the statement from 7th day to 8th day. He says, no, he meant 7th day. But he meant a nida. A nida is only to me'af for 7 days, not for, she doesn't have to bring korbanot. So, v'hanida shochadin aleh b'shvi'i. That the nida, you can bring the korban for her on the 7th day. So, amar le nida b'shvi'i michazia. How could you bring the korban for the nida on the 7th day? The nida is someone who cannot go to the mikveh on the 7th day. Only a zava can go on the 7th day. A zava has 7 clean days. So once she reaches the 7th clean day, theoretically she can go to the mikveh during the day even. And by the night she'll be tahorah. A nida, the 7 days, is the tumah. It's not the purification, it's the tum'ah. So she can't go to the mikveh till the night after the 7th day is over. And if that's the case, that would mean she has to wait she's a tvulat yom, basically, until the next night. Yeah. She can't eat the korban. So how could you slaughter for her on the 7th day? So, ella ima bashmini. Rather, we have to correct it and say shmini again. It means that you could slaughter for her on the 8th day. Pshita, then it's obvious. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. If when it comes to a zava, for whom the process is not even over on the 8th day because she still has to bring korbanot, and yet you're going to tell me that you can bring the korban pesach on her behalf even though she hasn't fulfilled all of her obligations. Anida, who fulfilled all of her obligations and already went to the mikveh. She went last night. Today she just has to wait out the day. So obviously you can bring the korban for her. What's the chidush? Nida, it's trichale. You still need it for nida. Why? Because you might have made the mistake to think that you could do it even on the 7th day for the nida. That's why he emphasized it, not as a chidush, because you would have thought you couldn't do it on the 8th day, but because you might have thought you could do it on the 7th day. And that's not correct, because she has to finish her entire 7 days, then go to the mikveh, then wait another day. Because all chayavei tevilot, everyone who has to go to the mikveh goes during the day, except for nida and yoledet, that they go at night. Okay, Ditanya, but as we learned in a Braita, Yachol Tehei Tovelet Mib'od Yom, Talmud Amar Shivat Yemim Tehei Benidata, Tehei Benidata Kol Shiva. It says 7 days she shall be in her state of nida. V'yoledet itkash the nida, and a yoledet is compared to a nida. In other words, one of the concepts that the Torah tells us about nida versus zava that you have to keep in mind is that a nida, it's a period of time that is the tum'ah. The tum'ah lasts 7 days and terminates after the 7th day. In a zava, that it's not that the tum'ah lasts 7 days.
On the 7th.
It's that you have 7 days that are clean as part of the purification. So that's the difference in the halachic structure of nida and zava. Nida is the 7 days, is the tum'ah. It's a period of tum'ah of 7 days. Not that the purification process is 7 days. Zava is like tumat met. Tumat met is that there's a process of purification that takes 7 days. You got to do hazah on the 3rd day, hazah on the 7th day, go to the mikveh, and then you're good. No, Zava has to wait 7 days that are clean days. Why are they clean days? Not because she's tame'ah for a certain period of time, but because the process of purification takes 7 days. That's why when she gets to day 7, she can already go to the mikveh in the morning. Whereas in the case of nida, how could she go to the mikveh during the day on the 7th day? That is the tumah is still on. So that's why she has to wait until the nighttime, and therefore for the nida she has to wait until 8 days, until the 8th day for her to bring the korban pesach. If the 7th day of her nida is the day that the korban pesach is brought, so that wouldn't be good. It has to be the 8th day, so that she's already gone to the mikveh and it's already the following day, and she's just waiting for sunset on that 8th day to be able to eat the korban.